The night was darker than usual, as if the clouds had swallowed the moon. Rain poured down in heavy sheets, drumming on rooftops and racing along the streets. The wind was so fierce it rattled shop signs and made people rush home early. Inside Tony's diner, however, there was warmth, the golden glow of lights reflecting on the shiny tiled floor and the comforting smell of freshly cooked meals still lingering in the air. Tony, the owner, had just sent his last customers home and was about to close up for the night. He was tired. Long hours in the restaurant business often left him drained. He moved behind the counter, wiping it clean with a rag, already thinking about locking the door and going upstairs to his small apartment above the diner. Then came the knock. It was faint, almost lost in the noise of the storm, but it caught his attention. He turned and glanced at the glass door. There, illuminated by the street lamp, stood two figures. One was an elderly woman, frail and bent from age, her clothes soaked through from the rain. Beside her was the little girl, no older than 6 or 7, clutching her grandmother's hand tightly. The girl's face was pale, her hair plastered. To her forehead, her eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. Tony froze for a moment. His first thought was confusion. What were they doing out in weather like this? His second thought was practicality. His diner was closed, and he didn't make a habit of letting strangers in at night. But when the old woman pressed her hand to the glass, and he saw the pleading look in her eyes, something tugged at his heart. He opened the door just slightly, enough for his voice to carry out. "Ma'am, we're closed for the night." The woman's voice trembled. "Please, sir, we don't need much. Just a place to stay for tonight. It's too cold out there." Tony looked at the girl. Her lips were trembling, her small hands wrapped around her grandmother's coat. That was all it took. Against every practical thought in his mind, he swung the door open wider. "Come in," he said softly. "You can stay here tonight." That single decision, made on a stormy night, would set into motion events that would change Tony's life forever. The moment they stepped inside, the warmth of the diner seemed to wrap around them like a blanket. The little girl's face softened just slightly, relief flickering in her tired eyes. The grandmother whispered a shaky "thank you," her voice barely audible over the rain still pounding against the windows. Tony guided them to a booth in the corner. The diner was empty now, its shiny red seats and spotless tables waiting for tomorrow's customers. "Sit down," he said, trying to sound casual, though his heart ached at the sight of them. "Let me get you something warm." He disappeared into the kitchen, quickly heating up some leftover soup and cutting thick slices of bread. As he carried the tray out, he noticed the little girl watching him with cautious curiosity, like she couldn't believe he was actually helping. He placed the steaming bowls on the table and slid the bread basket toward them. "Eat," he encouraged. "It's not much, but it's warm." The girl grabbed the spoon eagerly, while the grandmother's hands trembled as she lifted hers. Tears welled in the old woman's eyes as she took the first sip. I can't remember the last time we had something hot to eat," she whispered. Tony didn't respond right away. Instead, he sat across from them, just watching. He remembered his own childhood, how his mother had struggled after his father left. They'd often gone to bed hungry, and it was only the kindness of neighbors that had gotten them through some nights. Seeing this grandmother and child reminded him so much of those days. When they finished eating, Tony brought out an extra blanket he kept in the storage room. He led them to a small space in the back, usually used for storing supplies, and laid the blanket out on a cot. "You can sleep here tonight," he said. "It's not much, but it's dry and safe." The little girl yawned, already curling up under the blanket. The grandmother clasped Tony's hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. "God bless you," she said. Tony just nodded. "Get some rest." He turned away, but inside, something was stirring. He thought this would be just one night of kindness. He had no idea it was only the beginning of something much bigger. Morning sunlight filtered through the diner's blinds, casting warm stripes of light across the floor. Tony was already up, flipping pancakes on the griddle when he heard soft footsteps. He turned to see the little girl rubbing her eyes, her hair sticking up in every direction. Behind her came the grandmother, moving slowly, still looking fragile. but with a hint of gratitude in her eyes. "Good morning," Tony greeted them cheerfully. "Breakfast is on the house." He set plates of pancakes, scrambled eggs, and toast on the table. The girl's face lit up at the sight of the food. She clapped her hands, making Tony chuckle. As they ate, conversation began to flow. The grandmother introduced herself as Margaret, and the little girl as Lily. Slowly, between bites of food, Margaret told her story. 2 years ago, tragedy had struck their family. Lily's mother, Margaret's daughter, had passed away suddenly. Since then, Margaret had been doing everything she could to raise Lily alone. At first, she managed with a small job at a factory, but when the company downsized, she lost her job. One thing led to another, and soon she couldn't afford rent. With nowhere else to go, they had ended up on the streets. Tony listened quietly, every word weighing heavily on him. He couldn't imagine how hard it must have been for Margaret, carrying the weight of grief while trying to care for her granddaughter. At one point, Lily looked up from her plate and asked softly, "Mister, do you think my mommy can see me from heaven?" The innocence of the question hit Tony like a punch to the gut. His throat tightened and he had to look away to keep his emotions in check. "I think she can," he said finally, his voice rough. "And I think she's proud of you." Margaret wiped her eyes. "You've already done more for us than anyone else has in a long time," she said. "We won't forget this kindness." Tony smiled faintly, but inside he was wrestling with a new feeling. This wasn't just about one night anymore. He felt responsible for them, like fate had placed them in his path for a reason. After breakfast, Margaret gently told Tony they would leave. "We can't stay here," she said softly. "You've been kind enough, and we don't want to overstay our welcome." But as Tony looked out the window at the gray clouds gathering again, he felt uneasy. He knew what awaited them outside. Cold nights, empty stomachs, and the cruel indifference of strangers. Could he really just send them back into that life, after giving them hope, even briefly? His practical side argued against keeping them. He ran a business. Taking in people wasn't part of the plan. What if customers disapproved? What if his staff complained? What if it brought trouble? But then he looked at Lily, sitting quietly, hugging her little doll to her chest. He thought of his own childhood again, of the nights he and his mother had prayed for someone, anyone to help. And suddenly the decision was clear. "You don't have to go," Tony said firmly. "Stay here, at least until we figure something out." Margaret's eyes widened. "Are you sure?" Tony nodded. Everyone deserves a second chance. From then on, Margaret and Lily became part of the diner's daily routine. Margaret helped clean tables and wash dishes, while Lily, full of energy and charm, became the diner's unofficial hostess, handing out menus with a big smile. Customers adored her. Some even slipped her $1 or gave her candy. The diner began to feel different, warmer, more alive. And while Tony told himself it was temporary, deep down he knew he didn't want them to leave at all. It didn't take long for word to spread around town. People began whispering about the restaurant owner who had opened his doors to a homeless grandmother and child. At first, Tony braced himself for criticism. He worried customers might see it as unprofessional or strange. But instead, something remarkable happened. More people started coming to the diner. Some came out of curiosity, others because they wanted to support a business that showed kindness. They weren't just eating, they were experiencing something uplifting. They saw Lily's smile as she delivered menus, heard Margaret's polite greetings as she cleared tables, and felt the genuine warmth that had begun to radiate from the place. Before long, regular customers were bringing small gifts. A warm coat for Margaret, toys for Lily, bags of groceries. Someone even slipped Tony an envelope with money inside, asking him to use it to help them. Business boomed. Tables that had once sat empty were now full from morning to night. The diner, once struggling to stay afloat, was suddenly thriving. But Tony knew it wasn't just the food bringing people in anymore. It was the story. The reminder that kindness still existed in a world that often seemed cold. Margaret often said, We'll find our own way soon, Tony. You've already done too much." But every time she said it, Tony felt a pang in his chest. The truth was, he didn't want them to leave. Without even realizing it, they had become part of his life, part of his family. For weeks, things went on happily. The diner was busy, Margaret seemed healthier, and Lily thrived in the loving environment. But one evening, as Margaret was wiping down a table, she suddenly collapsed. Panic swept through the diner. Tony rushed to her side, lifting her gently as Lily cried out in fear. They called an ambulance, and within minutes, Margaret was rushed to the hospital. There, the doctor revealed the truth. Margaret had been battling a serious heart condition for years. Without treatment, her health would only continue to decline. Tony sat at her bedside, shaken. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. Margaret's tired eyes softened. "Because you've already done so much. I didn't want to be another burden." Her words pierced him. This woman, who had carried so much pain, still thought only of others. Tony knew he couldn't let her continue like this, but the cost of surgery was high, far more than Margaret could ever afford. That night, as he sat in the hospital room with Lily sleeping in a chair beside him, Tony made a vow. He wouldn't let them face this alone. When word spread about Margaret's condition, the community responded in a way no one expected. People who had once walked past her on the streets now rallied to her side. They had seen her smile at the diner, seen Lily's laughter, and they realized this family deserved a chance. Tony organized a fundraiser at the diner. The night of the event, the little restaurant overflowed. Musicians played for free. Kids sold cookies and lemonade. Customers donated money, clothes, and even services. Some slipped $100 bills into the donation jar. Others simply brought what they could: coins, baked goods, or prayers. Lily stood bravely on stage, clutching the microphone with her small hands. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling but strong. "Thank you for helping my grandma. I love her more than anything." The room erupted in applause. Tears filled Tony's eyes as he looked around. His simple act of kindness opening his door one rainy night had sparked a wave of generosity that brought the whole community together. By the end of the night, they had raised enough for Margaret's surgery. The surgery was a success. Margaret spent weeks recovering, growing stronger each day. When she finally returned to the diner, she was greeted with cheers and hugs from the customers who had come to love her. She began working as the cashier, greeting everyone with a smile. Lily, full of energy, decorated the diner with her drawings and slipped little notes to customers that read things like, "Be kind today." Tony often stood back and watched, his heart swelling with pride and gratitude. He had thought he was helping them for just one night, but in reality they had given him so much more. One evening, as they closed the diner together, Margaret looked at Tony with tears in her eyes. "You didn't just give us shelter, Tony. You gave us a home." Tony smiled and replied, "No, you gave me one too." And in that moment, Tony knew that his life had changed forever, not because of profits or success, but because of love, kindness, and the family he never expected to find. Your one click on subscribe and like gives us the strength to create more stories filled with hope and love. And when you share, you become part of someone else's happiness. Isn't that beautiful?